Hey everybody, America Thought Project here. Robert Barbosa with Nicole Lavencia. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Americanism. What is it and what are American values? So, we did publish a short form on this where I was kind of talking about what I thought Americanism was and what it was rooted in. So we're going to walk through a couple key pillars. I think before I hand it off to Nick for a couple points, I think first and foremost, Americanism and this idea of the American project, American experiment, it's all rooted in the dignity of the individual. Everything really stems from this idea that an individual person is an end in and of himself. Um, and there's a couple different items that flow through this: individual liberty, inalienable rights. So yeah, Nick, what are kind of your thoughts on Americanism? What does it mean to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think for the first thing to point out is we see this as one of the three major competing ideologies in the world today that are competing for, people's, I guess, loyalty or faith in. The other two that are driving the world today are leftism and Islamism, which is also, known as theocracy, but in modern society, we see it taking place in the institutionalization of Islam, which is why we say that and not theocracy. But so the point of this, right, is talking about why we think Americanism out of those three is the best path for this country moving forward, and also arguably for the world to adopt. So to me, I really focus on Americanism being the culmination of three core values. You actually see them in a lot of our culture, our coinage in America today. The first and most important one to me, I think, is liberty. You discussed that one. For the record, and for the conservatives out there watching this, liberty comes from the word liberal. Liberal is not a bad word. So liberty, of course, is the freedom to do as you want, so long as you are not infringing on the rights of others and the freedoms of others. So liberty is the first core American value. The second one is e pluribus unum. Today's July, and early July, and I really wish that a lot of people would take e pluribus unum to heart, given the movement that we have going on in society today on cultural discord. E pluribus unum means out of many, one. So we acknowledge that America is a melting pot, is a summation, a culmination of many different belief systems, social values, all different cultures, religions that have come together into one. But at the end of the day, we are one people. We have one culture. And that is what e pluribus unum means. It means that we respect everyone's differences, but we come together as a single people, not a confederation of tribes that are constantly battling with one another. And then third and final one to me is in God we trust. And this is a really important one to touch upon too, because unlike what it may sound like, it does not compel you to believe in God. I'm speaking to all the atheists and agnostics out there. What in God we trust to me means is that God is providing us a sense of moral absolutionism, a guidepost that rules and guides us in our quest for morality and goodness, as opposed to using your conscience as a guide,
Right.
which is the idea of moral relativism. So in God we trust is an acknowledgement that our belief system is based on Judeo-Christian values, but is not that Judeo-Christian values are not law. You do see that in Islamism, for example, in Sharia law. So you don't have to believe in God to recognize the benefits of believing in a system that is based on a deity that keeps us morally centered and good. So I again, to wrap up, I think those three core American values and embracing those is what Americanism is all about in forming a center-right or center-left society. So
Right.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, so first, this idea of liberty, right? Individual liberty. What does that really mean? We talk about it a lot. You know, it's always the first couple things that I reference when I talk about America, or what pops in my head. It's automatically individual liberty coupled with individual responsibility, and really this idea of freedom from the state, the ability of individuals to be as free as practically possible from government interference in their lives, and the idea that governments are not entities, they're not an individual in and of themselves, right? They're only they're instituted. I mean, as the Declaration of Independence says, they're instituted among men to further protect our individual liberties, right? Um, so that freedom from the state to live our lives, to chart our own course. I mean, this is what made America great and one of the youngest countries become a superpower, and ultimately the most free, the most prosperous, the most equitable, the most fair country that the world has known to this day, right? It attracted people who just wanted a chance. They didn't want a certainty. They didn't expect a certainty. They didn't expect a specific outcome. They just wanted a chance. The refugee just wanted freedom from tyranny and from oppression, and the religious person wanted to practice the religion that they wanted, and the enterprising person just wanted the ability to achieve success, while also knowing that there's just as good and you're just as free to fail as you are to succeed, right? Um, and I think an important piece of liberty and individual freedom is economic freedom is inextricable from political freedom, and religious freedom is inextricable from political freedom. Like, you can't have religious freedom unless you have political freedom. You can't have political freedom unless you have economic freedom. And the economics is more than just money, but the ability to have free exchanges, voluntary interactions with people based on your own accord, free from coercion, right? Um, so, anyways, that's kind of my view on liberty. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it'd be helpful for us to just kind of talk about how that applies to what's going on today, right? I think there's just this skewed view of what Americanism really is, and to me, it all boils down to the individual. The individual being free to make decisions that he or she wants to, whether it be through worship, through work, whatever the case may be, right? Um,
I feel like we see a lot of problems today that are actually, ironically, a result of us being too free. We have so much freedom that we're having problems agreeing and disagreeing on certain issues, and it's forming what I referenced earlier, tribalism. And tribalism is the opposite of e pluribus unum, and I feel like that is what is potentially like the downfall of our society. When we talked about government structure previously, and I think it's important to note that Americanism is the only form of those three ideologies. Leftism and Islamism are both super far left. They are absolute statist regimes, whereas Americanism is the only one that, whether you're center left or center right, doesn't matter. You are further to the right than the other two. Modern Democrats today are way further to the right than leftists and Islamists. I think that's interesting to note. So when we say, don't get those words confused, but we also understand that tribalism is not good, because the basic form of tribalism was a confederation of states with no central power, and we already discussed why that's bad. You can't raise an army to defend yourself, for one.
right.
It's harder to provide public goods, which I know a lot of people on the political left are really focused on. They want to provide social services and goods to other people, and you cannot do that if you have no central government of any kind. But I just think it's important to recognize that this is the only ideology on earth today that is really a huge proponent of restraining government power.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that that never gets out of focus.
Yeah. And I mean, the moral character begins with taking responsibility for yourself. And Americanism is rooted and founded in that. Because with your individual freedom comes a responsibility for yourself. And leftist, capital L, they push the welfare state. Well, a welfare state and a nanny state teaches people to not take care of themselves and to not have responsibility for the actions that they take. So if that ideology isn't teaching people how to take care of themselves, how much more does it teach them to not take care of others? And in a civil society with a tight-knit social fabric, you want that moral conviction to take care of others, because it is the individual's responsibility to do that, not the government's responsibility to force another individual to take care of someone, right? That's what it is with like, we'll just take subsidized housing. I'm forced at gunpoint to pay a portion of my income to the government, and then they take the fruit of my labor and turn around and give it to someone else to take care of them. So the government is forcibly confiscating my property that I created with my mind and my labor to redistribute it to take care of someone else. That is not what Americanism is founded on. Americanism is founded on the individual, me choosing out of my own moral conviction and choice to take care of my neighbor, should they need it, right? So we've drifted very far from true Americanism American founding ideals. You can read through all of the founders' correspondence with one another and the folks that they read, and we were never meant to have a big administrative welfare state that forcibly takes from one to give to the other, that forces a specific idea of the, quote, common good on the plurality of people. That is an anti-American idea. And not so it's kind of this never-ending snowball, right? If moral character begins with taking responsibility for yourself, and a system's put in place that retards that process and forces society to take care of others against their own will in some cases, then moral character isn't developed, right? And then the less moral character developed, the more state you need to force the taking care of your neighbor, right? So it's just this perpetual cycle of a lack of moral development and an infringement on individual rights.
So I want to touch on something that you referenced when we talk about when the state's responsibility is to take care of someone, and this is very different than the Americanist ideology of you need to take care of yourself, and the government should allow you the rights and the means to be able to go out and fend for yourself. So Europe is pretty much the shining example of leftism today, right? In the vast majority of those countries. And one of the really interesting data points that I've seen is on charitable donations. When we see the effect of big government on people's sense of generosity. So I was looking up some data here, just rough numbers here. Eurozone GDP 2019 was like 18.2 trillion, and USA GDP 2018 was like 20.5 trillion. So GDP is pretty close, right? Eurozone and USA have similar GDP numbers, all right? USA charitable donations were $427 billion in 2018. Eurozone is somewhere around 87 billion euros. And I think this is highlighting a very simple idea, a very simple philosophy. If you believe that the government's job is to take care of other people, then you have no incentive to help your fellow neighbor, to
Right.
help your fellow man, to go out of your way and give to charity, be philanthropic, and volunteer your time, because it's somebody else's problem, which is
Yeah.
why we see hugely higher numbers of charitable donations and philanthropic activity in the United States when we have a similar GDP number. And that just goes to show you that in America, we take it upon ourselves to help our fellow man, or at least we have more incentive than you do in leftist societies where it's somebody else's problem.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And, reliance on the state also creates a sense of entitlement. And we see the unfortunate ramifications of entitlement, I think, with, probably the most recent 2 generations on anything that we feel that we want becomes a right. I have a right to have healthcare provided to me for quote free. I have the right to education. Well, you cannot have a right that imposes an obligation on another human. That is the line that's drawn of rights. There is no such thing as a right that requires the action of another person. It requires a human right, an individual inalienable right, is in part defined by negative action required from another.
Yeah.
You don't have the right to infringe on mine. I don't have the right to infringe on yours. But you don't have the right to my services, and I don't have the right to your services.
Right. I'm a huge proponent of negative rights, which I think is exactly what you were just saying. You have the right to not have your life stripped from you. You have the right to not have the pursuit of happiness be deterred by government or some other person's actions. You have the right, what's the third one? Life and liberty, or life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. You have the right to have those things not be stripped from you.
Right.
But I do not believe in positive rights. The right to, for example, this is a very contentious one, healthcare access, the right to a living wage, the right to this, the right to that. Those are positive rights that someone else affords you. And for generally speaking, I don't believe in a whole lot of positive rights because it compels action on someone else. Whereas negative rights just restrains unreasonable behavior from other people with the intent of infringing your rights.
And all of our founders would agree with you.
To varying degrees. There
Right.
are, some, again, that there were two parties,
Right.
for the whole time. But generally speaking, we agree as an ideology that centrism and restraining government power is essential to what it means to be in America.
Right. So I think, we'll do a number of kind of Americanism sessions, right? So, but to wrap up this first one, I think I'd like to close with the idea of America. The brilliance in it to me is that it really mirrors the human story, and that we recognized that we are a flawed people. And we suggested a form of government that is most conducive to a flawed people, right? And I've mentioned this a number of times in Federalist paper. Madison says if angels were men, there'd be no need for government. And if angels governed men, there'd be no need to restrain it. This is a beautiful acknowledgement of the human reality that we are conflicted individuals that are flawed. And what America did was acknowledge this and acknowledge that we weren't perfect from the onset, right? And the preamble to the Constitution talks about in order to form a more perfect union, which signifies we know we're on a journey to continue to perfect as much as we can this union.
Knowing that we'll never actually get to perfection.
Right. Exactly. So it's the epitome of setting out our highest ideals while also understanding that we can't achieve those fully this side of heaven because we are a flawed people. And America set the foundation for the most equitable, the most just, the most free country the world has ever known. And we weren't perfect from the onset. We're never going to be completely perfect. But if you look at the world timeline as your full context and you see the break from norms that America broke from these norms and set on this journey of equity among people, of freedom, of prosperity, all of these amazing American high ideals and goals, right? I think we have to be grateful of this and understand the realities of life. We're not perfect. We're not going to be perfect. America's history isn't perfect. No one's history is perfect. But we are on a journey that you can clearly see when you take a step back to more freedom, to more equity, to moral progress and character development. And there's ebbs and flows. You know, you could argue there's been some regression in that area over the last couple decades. But I think for this first segment of Americanism, we should realize that America broke from any norms the world's ever known and set us on this new path that's all rooted in the dignity of the individual.
Agreed.
So with that, we'll dive in to Americanism in part 2 and 3. I don't know how many segments of this, but I think it's an overarching theme of American thought projects. So we'll periodically dive into American values, what Americanism means to us. Until then, be grateful, be thankful that we live in the most free and most equitable nation the world has ever known. American Thought Project here. Like, share, subscribe. Let us know what you think below. Until next time.
Till next time. Thanks.